Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lorelines. I just wanted to open the floor right away to everyone. It's been about a week. Good to see you all. Hope everything's going well.
Good to see you too, Fail.
Yay.
Hey.
How did everybody, how was your week, everybody?
BUC.
Week went fine this weekend. Oh boy.
So
Oh,
quick
not
for
bad.
Ayumi, busy for Shadow Meowth. Neela?
It's been good, except I've got a sick nephew, poor guy. So if I
Oh.
randomly disappear, that's why.
Understood.
F.
Well, that's been
Well,
known
not
to happen.
F, hopefully, but
Hopefully. No, it's more like a stomach bug.
no.
F in one way, not the other.
Important distinction.
Yes. It's funny. I should tell you guys, Arden won't be here today. She's feeling under the weather. Hopefully she gets well soon. But, gosh, in terms of announcements, I wanted to just touch base with you guys in chat. Did you guys see Alex Mukala's post on Twitter the other day?
I didn't. What was it?
I
what
did,
was it
yes.
about?
Yeah, so he, for those who don't know, you absolutely should know about this man. Incredible musician, has worked with Husky by the Geek on some
Yes.
community projects, as well as just has an amazing talent and like a backlog of incredible videos. I've been following him since I noticed about it. Gosh, it's been a while now. I'm sure I wasn't the first to the party, but he just tweeted he's doing a community project involving all of us, honestly, not the cast, but all of us fans of Final Fantasy XIV. He's putting together a composition and is asking for people to sing in a massive, like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fans chorus as part of the project. So
Similar to what they did
Sing?
for Soken.
yeah,
Sing what?
well,
Because depending...
yeah, exactly.
There's details in the tweet. You can find all the
Oh.
There
information. I'll
are.
grab it real quick.
I'm gonna actually bring up a window.
Because
I
I
have it
could
open.
whip out the Guardian anthem.
No. This is a
It's
specific,
a specific
project.
one.
Okay.
So just a moment, guys. I'm gonna bring us into our slideshow really quick. Every time, guys. Every time. I'm very sorry.
We still like you.
I actually specifically fixed this earlier, so I do not know.
It's almost like you're cursed a little bit.
It is. I have the curse. I'm gonna try to add it one more time.
Yeah.
Well, I failed. But anyway, he has a video here. I recommend you guys all check it out. If you go to that link, scroll down a little bit to a message to the Final Fantasy community. He's looking for people to just kind of throw their voices at him, and he has a Google Drive and everything. So I'm probably going to try to participate as an individual of no particular importance, but
See,
I
you
wanted
have
to
the
share
voice,
everybody.
I don't.
Oh boy.
You do have to.
I would like to take a moment as well to say that what he says in the tweet, and I'll underscore it as well, you don't have to be a great singer. You
Yeah.
don't have to have a fantastic mic. This is a community project. Add your voice to the, to the chorus. No one's going to listen and be like, wow, Foul's out of tune. You
Yeah,
know?
they're not going to hear me.
We're not going to be able to tell.
My
It'll be
red
better to
knights.
have,
No, sorry.
yeah. Don't be shy. Have fun with this. This can be a beautiful labor of love.
What if I lip sync the whole thing?
I mean,
Yes.
sure.
We're going to go with yes.
What are we looking at, Foul?
We're looking at a Firefox window.
Mm-hmm. It's super important, everybody.
The latest concept from Elpis, ladies and gentlemen.
What if we had a fox, but it was on fire?
Oh, nobody wants to hear my little voice. Come now.
You too, Core.
Absolute
I still
madness.
don't hear anyone.
Anyways, yeah.
I can never win,
so-
everybody. I can never win.
Nope. Well, we seen the tweet.
Yep, understood. So moving on. Today is our long-awaited additional episode on Elpis. You might recall the first or second week we just kept going into it and into it and into it, and how can you resist, right? Like, this zone is the zone of Endwalker, kind of, until you get to
Kinda
Ultima
is.
Thule, but it's kind of the zone. And so, I guess both the joy of seeing things we really hoped to see, and then also some of us are a little upset about timey stuff. So as promised, this is the episode where we're going to discuss that timey-wimey nonsense, and here we go.
Oh, I can't wait to fucking get into that.
It's going to be absolutely
that-
nuts.
Me either.
That
Also,
That
hi
was-
everyone.
that was needed with an evil laugh accompanying that, something like.
I can just feel.
I
I can just feel the
That was
La
good.
Brea. I could just feel it.
No,
Anyways.
I mean, you can't do evil laughs, but you can do laughs. Those kill everyone.
Yeah, like Ghoulis.
Speaking, Mista says crafting, go to Elpis. Need idle Elpis board, hanging out in Elpis. I
Yeah,
absolutely
exactly.
concur.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to this that due to my fascination with Ericthonios, I have learned that if you log out in Pandemonium, you don't have the 20-second wait log out. It just logs you right out.
One could say you're
Does it
chained
really?
down to
It's a rest zone?
Pandemonium.
It doesn't. I don't think it has rest. I haven't paid close attention, honestly, but it doesn't make you like do the 20-second log out thing.
I think
Then it's a sanctuary.
Yeah, it's a
Nice.
sanctuary.
He's my sanctuary. It's great because I get to see him the first thing every time I log in.
Now that's a great way to come back to the game.
It
I'll come
is.
back to my house.
I'm just remembering Ericthonios
Yeah,
running
bring
at us,
him to my
chains
house
out.
no matter what.
So back to Elpis. So
I mean, should we discuss first the Crystal Tower and the thing, or that would be perhaps?
did we do that last
Wow.
time? Did
I
we
can't
discuss?
recall.
We already kind of touched on that a bit, but
Okay.
like we could maybe touch on it again just as a lead up to the time stuff.
Why don't we? Because I know some of you have a very strong opinion about that scene as well.
Mhm.
So we go and we kind of muse over what we need to do to kind of fix the final days or figure out what happened during the final days. And we're going over possible solutions in Thavner, and we're all sitting around a table. And we just keep thinking of ideas and ideas, and we keep running into dead ends and dead ends. And then we someone throws out one idea, and then Graha's like, not quite alive yet, not quite dead. And then the mention of Elidibus. And of course, at the back of our minds, we're thinking, he has to come back in some way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys know I've been carrying the torch for that since 5.3.
Yeah,
So have
absolutely.
I.
Mhm.
Not dead.
Same.
Like there's
I
a reason he
mean-
was sealed.
We were. I mean, we've actually during the over the past year, we've been actually going on Elidibus being freed in the Crystal Tower for some reason, and it turns out that we were right, but.
What I wasn't expecting was the mention that it was bit by bit kind of being released into the ethereal sea. So I was kind of like thinking, okay, well, I mean, if we get to him in time, that'd be great. If not, half of his essence will be gone, and we can only speak to like half of him or something like that. I didn't know what the inner workings of the Crystal Tower did, but that was new to me.
Yeah, I'm the same as well on that. And I also enjoyed how Grahatia, who has like the absolute opposite of a hero complex. He's done plenty of stuff. He's been on plenty of adventures already, but he's always thinking of himself as lesser. He just kind of brings up, yeah, no, I still got him. He's like in my bag. So We could talk to him if you want, guys.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You could have told me
what?
this before when I was crying in my pillow.
2 years, you won't let us talk to Elizabeth. What the fuck?
Listen, I just wanted to be a hero.
Can we go on another adventure? Again? How greedy are you, bro?
I had to argue with myself to bring out Crystal Exarch just a few moments ago.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyways, so yeah, we figured that out, and he obviously mentions to us that we have the ability to go back to the Crystal Tower, to the first, but he doesn't, obviously. So get back to the first. We get to talk to our besties again, Lena, Reen,
MacLeod.
Guy, who's nowhere to be seen, unfortunately,
Hmm.
and the kids.
That was unfortunate in retrospect.
How unfortunate.
How unfortunate.
I mean, that would have been a nice little touch, because I know that they like alter dialogue in some scenes when you do complete like certain raids.
But that was interesting in the moment when the conversation with Reen regarding revelations from the live letter, though, when Reen says that she felt as if her connection with probably the Shard of Hydaelyn had been severed entirely, and well, considering certain revelations, it would make perhaps sense.
Yeah, she was Hydaelyn at this point in the story is so weakened that she isn't really reaching out to her shards.
Not just that, but I don't know. I mean, the first is kind of weird when it comes. I don't know how the time dilation is working right now. Right when we go to the
It
start of
says like
Shadowbringers,
yeah, it was like
it's a near equivalence, but doesn't mean it's the same right now. So I'm kind of thinking maybe she felt
shifted
in
again.
advance when Hydaelyn dissipates.
That's
I
an
don't know.
interesting thought. I didn't take it that way, though. I kind of just read it straight. So since they haven't mentioned
It
that
could
time has
be, I
changed
mean,
and she's not
it's
30
just-
years older when we get there.
It goes
Yeah.
off of that theory I had way earlier on in a few episodes ago, that the sin eaters on the first are similar to that of the golems that the Amdapor use
Mhm.
on the
Oh,
source.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I feel like they're more like Sin Eater lights, but they were heading in that direction.
Hmm.
And that like and that's my crackpot theory. Like the Asians kind of use templates or used a similar type of. The Asians basically gave them the idea of such a being to use for their golems in order to battle Mach.
You know,
Yeah.
to
keep a
me,
war going.
it kind of seems like this is just the archetypal change that will occur on any source's shard given a certain polarity.
Yeah.
Now I know that the time doesn't
That's my take
match
as
up,
well.
but I mean time dilation from source to first.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
thing.
But yeah, at absolute least, Reen is noticing that she can't reach out to
Hmm.
Mama Heidi.
It's just it's going to be interesting because with confirmation that Hydaelyn and Zodiac are gone from the shards basically too, that means that Gaia is losing, would have lost the connection as Oracle of Darkness as well.
Whatever that meant in the first place. I feel like the
Whatever.
Oracle of
Yeah.
Darkness
It was
thing was
very
really just set
ambiguous.
up to
I
to
mean-
give us the lesbians.
Yeah.
Hell
Uh,
yeah.
I mean,
Fair.
all right.
Fair.
Like I saw no. It felt like a meta title. This is a title we're giving you, the players. It
Yeah.
doesn't actually make any sense in game anymore than we call
Yeah.
her the Oracle
I
of Light
mean,
because
Take it
Yeah,
as you like it.
reasons. Yeah.
You can do a lot
Yeah.
more with it yourself. We're just going to give you that, and you can play with it.
Yeah, her powers
Absolutely.
weren't really coming from Zodiark, and they just kind of called her the Oracle of Darkness to balance out having an
Yeah.
Oracle of Light.
I mean, it was kind of. There's some dialogue from Urianger after E2, I think. But anyways, that would be. We should actually have an episode of on Eden.
True.
But anyway,
It'll be fun. Someday.
someday.
Part 7.
So yeah. So yeah, there we. So.
So we're in the Crystal Tower. We're talking to
Uh-huh.
Elidibus about going home,
Yes.
so to
We
speak.
access the control panel. Yeah, we bring him out, and he's like, "My home, my friends,
He
they're all
was
gone or
bas-
whatever." Yeah.
Have
he was
nothing
bas-
left.
It seems that he was sleeping, and we came knocking, and he's like, "Why?"
Yeah. Why are you here? You beat me up. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
We have a
Your
question.
unsolicited act
We have a
has
question,
restored me
Elidibus.
some memories.
I mean, he's got reason to be a bit cranky.
Yeah.
Sure,
Every
but
reason in the
I
world.
mean, I still felt like I would have liked to have had him at that point at least recognize us a little more.
I
I
would-
feel like that's
He's
something they
like-
could have done with dialogue options. They could have said,
Yeah.
well, you say this, and then he's a little, he thaws out, or you say
He's
that, and he
actu-
stays prickly.
He's actually he does actually. I mean, he does that actually. If
Like,
you apologize to him,
not on the level I'm asking for.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
talking about
Okay.
actual.
Okay.
I'm. You can't. I swear. I think about this in normal everyday amount.
Not lip service is what you're looking for.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
they could have given us a little bit more closure on him, and
Okay.
especially because they didn't reference him really at all on the moon, which was a missed opportunity.
I took the dialogue
Indeed.
choice, which ended with him saying something like, why are you upset?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
well,
That's when you
'cause-
It was the
apologize
kindest
to
one.
him. When you apologize to him, and he says, Why you apologize for receiving a favor of the defeated?" And then he says, "If it's ill, consider this as payment for freeing Lord Zodiac from servitude." And it's
Mhm.
like,
I don't want payment. I want your dumb butt to come to Elpis with me.
Exactly.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine if Emmett Selk had to deal with not only quote unquote Asm's familiar, but also say
Oh.
Elidibus's familiar? He would, if his hair wasn't already white. I'm just saying.
I can imagine Cobran absolutely flipping his shit with the time,
that would've
the
been
time
great.
annoyance. Are you serious? All right, so we're gonna sacrifice him to Zodiark. He's gonna become the heart of Zodiark, and then pop back out as a primal, and then in the distant future, he'll be coming back.
Like in this unrecognizable
The more
form.
you talk about
You won't-
time
you
travel,
won't
the
even recognize him.
angrier I get.
And 20 minutes later, Famous is here as well.
Yeah,
And
and,
they
then
get
he
to
jumps
have-
into his old body,
Oh my goodness.
which came out from the heart of Zodiark, and then he goes through the whole thing again. So it's
Yep.
just the same
it's
person
another
in
bullshit
a
loop.
constant loop for forever. He's
I love
trapped
it.
in this hell. He'll
Remember,
never get out of.
Grahatia merging with
Wait.
his soul means that this is metaphysically
No, he
possible.
could fade out there. It'd be fine. It is entirely possible. Yeah.
There's nothing preventing that at all.
Thanks for that, Graha.
yeah. So yeah, he basically powers up he's got one of his flashbacks when we talk to him about Elpis, and then he's like, "Wait, I saw you there in Elpis," and I recall the first time hearing that. Are you actually remembering as a mate? And it turns out that in Pandemonium, that's a different whole story. But anyways,
No,
I
this is
mean, it's
relevant.
fair.
We're getting ahead of ourselves, but it does matter because we've discussed a couple times and we'll be discussing in depth today about, like, is there one timeline or multiple? And so
I mean,
which-
there's that thing he says. No, I did not, but I did. A lingering trace of an impossibility.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what exactly does that?
it means we're
I
paracausal,
have a
which is
strong-
the word in every game for the last 2 years.
I was gonna say I have a strong feeling about that one myself. I think they put that in the MSQ because not everyone is going to necessarily do the raid series.
That's true.
In those cases, Asm
Oh,
comes to Pandemonium with quote unquote Themis, and they do the Pandemonium together. However, the paracausal thing you bring up, there is that possibility that the Warrior of Light goes back to Elpis and does Pandemonium, and then Asm's like, they got this. I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, so this is Azem is a
Needs more
paracausal
quotes,
fortune
no.
teller who can see infinitely into the future and the past.
Yeah,
apparently.
which is a little weird
It's a little
for them
much.
to imply, but here he is.
And I mean, they've been
Don't
leaning
worry,
into
we'll
it a
get
little
to
bit
it.
with the end of Pandemonium stuff, but we can get into that later.
Carbonized time is coming up.
So he opens the hole in
Oh,
time.
real quick.
hmm
Oh, okay, never mind. Kobe answered it in chat.
Oh, okay, good.
I mean, we can still address it.
Let's talk
That's
about it.
true. So would an unsundered ancient fusing with an unsundered ancient's own soul make them doubly unsundered? Well, it's important to bear in mind first that not all souls have the same ethereal density. Even the Warrior of Light being sundered rejoined with Ardbert is the most dense soul that,
That
MacLeod has ever
exists right
seen.
now.
Yeah, that seems to exist right now, exactly. But, some souls have abundance of magical reserves, and that seems to be the ethereal density thing. Some have less, like Hythlodaeus. Like Erchthonios says he doesn't have that much, but he can transform. There seems to be an entire scale. So
It almost
you
seems
can
additive,
have
right?
an unsundered soul joined to its own unsundered soul. It does seem additive, yeah. And still be less than a normal than Hades, for example, potentially. But it's it's
Setting
weird.
the bar a
Does it
bit
double
high.
up? I don't know.
Well, so let's talk about Shadowbringers briefly. So Grahatia, right? So he's survived the 8th Umbral, making him a 9 shard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, or is it an 8? 8 calamities.
I feel like it's an 8.
Okay, well, 8 or 9, and then he hopscotches over to the 1st in our timeline, and then he joins his 8 or 7 soul body on the source. Big ol'
He's
huh?
not exactly that that OP.
He's
think
not,
that what-
right?
No.
I mean,
Big
yeah.
ol' huh?
We just need to
So-
look at the Shadowbringers patches to see that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I would say that the thing that really merged were the memories. That's how
Yep.
Graha actually tends to describe it. So
Yeah, he said nothing about the
yeah.
soul. He said mind and memories.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's entirely
I will point
possible-
out though, I can actually counterpoint that when you're done, Meowth.
Oh. No, I'm saying that perhaps the proper core of the soul of Grahatia is actually what crystallized at the top of the crystal tower in the first, and what he transferred were the memories. But that's just
Well, let me counterpoint that, because when the Scions travel back from the first, when we put them in our backpack, god damn it, sorry, I'm trying to find. I have a thing with this. So basically, there's this whole thing where they focus on the crystals and they put their memories in, and then the red portion of it glows, but the blue portion stays dim. Then they put their souls in, and the whole thing glows red and blue. When Graha does this, he puts his memories in the this happens before the Scions travel during
Yes.
5.3. He puts his memories in, it glows red. There at the top, when he's standing there and he takes it in hands once more, he holds it and it turns blue.
Mm-hmm.
And their bodies
They
disappear.
pretty clearly indicate. Yep.
Yes, but at the same time, he's not left soulless because he's still.
He's just a chunk of crystal up there. He's connected to
No,
the tower.
I didn't mean that. I mean he has.
I misunderstood then. Sorry.
I mean that he does that, and he still is able. I think he's still able to speak
He's-
and say
yeah, he's
something
still-
else.
He's still ambulatory for like a little bit longer, but then he turns into a
Yeah.
crystal. So it's a little bit
Well, I
of
mean,
a fudge, but
to
it's
me, I see
believable.
that like an Ascian holding their crystal of darkness.
Yeah,
Mhm.
he's still
possible,
close enough
yeah.
to his soul that it's like he's going, but he's like not quite there yet.
And it's a 3-part in that dialogue. It's a 3-part message. He says, "Mind and memories, and then my body will remain here." So
Yeah.
soul is not
And it was
mentioned at
for-
all. Soul appears to be mind plus memories.
Yeah, it was a dramatic effect kind of thing too.
True.
It's fair. Meh. That's
It's-
one of the
it's
questions
definitely-
we should ask.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's definitely a thing that's a little unclear, but you can certainly infer one way or the other from it based on how you interpret it
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, their answer would be something like, "Oh, I didn't know you were that observant. Take it how you will. We left it open for you."
That's probably what they would say. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, fair enough.
So
Anyways.
we leave the tower and we go back through the rift of time.
I want to comment on that briefly because I found
Go.
it very interesting. I was actually very surprised that the travel looked like our Rift travel, like generally speaking, different memory crystal-y things appearing, but very similar overall to our Rift travel to get to the first. And now I'm wondering
the
if it's a
same.
product. Yeah, it's the same kind, just different little memories showing up. And I'm wondering if that's a product of using the crystal tower to travel anywhere, or if Rift travel and time travel are actually just kind of similar.
It's an interesting
Um,
question for sure.
I would argue that technically we did traverse the rift, considering that we were traveling back to a point where all of the shards were merged. So we
That's
would
a
have
very good point.
we could have technically probably gone along the same timeline and stayed on the first, but we probably went to the source because that's probably where the location in the rift,
Yeah,
the
Where
my
everything
original
was
planet
rejoined.
would have been.
If you
My
if you trace the
expectation
river
would
of
be-
time back, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, my expectation would be that if you travel backwards in time on the first, either you will be automatically shunted onto the source, or you will be in a dimension with nothing because it wasn't that dimension. I'm not sure if that dimension existed before the Sundering, if that was created by the Sundering, or if it was just
Right.
banished there.
I view
I
this.
would
So,
say the second.
so yeah, I think you're right. I think rift travel is the logical assumption here.
From my point of view, the way they depicted time travel, dimension travel, in here is called a rift. But this thing of being scattered moments in which you can go into, because these crystals appear to be moments in time.
They are.
And that reminds me a lot to the Historia Crux in Final Fantasy 13 too.
Yeah, these crystals are doors into a time space. They are
Exactly.
actual time travel. And I mean
Mhm.
it's an interdimensional rift, right? So we're following the river of time back to a place that Elidibus as an unsundered can actually remember. And
Mm.
we just happen to have enough juice from all of the souls that he absorbed during Seat of Sacrifice to get all the way back.
I
So-
expect his own soul had a lot more juice than them, just because the sacrifice of a soul seems to give this big old bump.
Maybe.
Here,
Solid
here is where I will begin my rant because we
Rita.
travel back in time. Here is where we cross the rift and travel back in time.
Don't cross the
When-
streams.
Whatever. When
I'm just messing with you.
when he brought up the fact that we are going back in time, I had my initial doubts at first. Like, I really don't want to do this. It'd be nice to see us go back to the Unsundered world in like a memory form, but I don't want to go back and start finagling with things. Because I'm just gonna use an example in other games. When you go to the past in other games and you change the timeline and it affects the present where you return back to, now you're kind of changing how the game is influenced on another scale. Like everything up to the point where you played now has changed. So now you have to keep track of 2 games. And it can get messy if it's not done correctly, which was shown in the live letter last night. And and this was something that I really, really was worried about. And I spoke with people last week, and I spoke with people the week before, and the week before that it will get messy if they don't do this right, and if they leave stuff open to interpretation. And what did they do? They left stuff open to interpretation. So here come the
Goodness
retcons.
gracious.
Retconning in games does not work well for the narrative. You can
Depending on the retcon. If we do an additive retcon, yes, but in this case we're looking at rewrites, which is not good.
Not
We're
good.
And
going back
the,
essentially now to rewrite the past. The entire game that we have come from 1.0 to 2.0, 3 and 4 and 5. And now we are rewriting the narrative that we've known up to that point. It's almost kind of what happened with what Star Wars was like.
Yeah.
In that Disney overwrote the narrative that we had known up to that point with their new narrative and said that, all the stuff that you've known before, it's non-canon before. But we're still going to pull from it. It's the same thing.
It's canon when we use it again.
It's uncomfortably close to the thing I hated about Star Wars, and the reason why, despite having a Star Wars username, if you didn't know, I don't really engage with the fandom much anymore.
Yeah, it can be kind of vicious, but it's still the same concept, and I hate it because you buy all the merchandise, you subscribe to the different magazines and buy the toys, video games, and all that. I'm just gonna go off on a small little tangent away from 14, but like it's the same concept. You go and you are a part of this fandom that suddenly now isn't the fandom that you signed up for. So,
Mhm.
and
That's exactly what it felt like with Star Wars. It was just like, this isn't my home anymore.
exactly. Like all the games that I played, oh my gosh, this cool character that I really liked is non-canon. But you said it was
Mhm.
canon before. No, it's not canon. But you have all this merchandise for them and no, it's not canon.
It's a bad road to go down because you alienate you alienate at least a good portion of your deeper character player base, your interest base.
And the same thing is going to start happening with 14, and that you start rewriting the narrative in the same way. You start going back to 1.0, 2.0, and you start saying, oh, these characters left open to interpretation. This is just an ambiguous answer. You can think of the way that this person did something and just kind of, I don't know, maybe they did that. This person has an item, or this person has a name that was written a certain way. We don't know how to really kind of explain it all that well in the future, but we'll come back to it. And that to me is sloppy writing.
Yes, if I may,
Extremely.
if I may, I'm of the opinion generally that if you want to make a story about time travel, it has to be a story or an entire subplot about time travel. Elsewise, it seems like scrapping the bottom of the barrel for the narrative to the last and not really great resource resort to make a narrative progress. Here, I mean, I understand why they went because narratively it has it, to me at least, it makes sense. But the problem perhaps is that they focus it on the on a singular point, which is the loop that the Warrior of Light establishes when telling, in particular Vena about. I'm getting ahead of everything, but anyways,
That's fine.
the loop, well, it's not even that, because the loop starts actually before, with Pandemonium. If Pandemonium had not ever happened, then Elidibus Themis wouldn't have
The first loop
have
was with
any.
Alexander. The second loop was with
Yeah.
Graha. The third loop was with Elpis.
Let's
Well,
pause for a moment.
Alexander were closed loops, actually. Graham thought that he had went outside the
Alexander.
loop, and turns out that it was part of a bigger loop.
So
which
this
is-
loop,
So I
started back
went
in Heaven's Ward.
I went back and I went through all of Alexander, and it's much messier than we thought it was. It's not
is messy.
actually a closed loop.
It's not. It's like a roller coaster.
Yeah. So what happened
Like the
was
loop,
when they summon Alexander, and this is in the game, he created or could envision an infinite number of possible futures. What that means is, because at that point you can't create an infinite number of possible futures, you have to also create an infinite number of possible pasts, which is where the multiple timeline thing came from, which is what Graha used when he split off the Aethermal Calamity timeline. That's why that happened that way, and it wasn't on just a single timeline. What Yoshi P said his interpretation was that there's only one timeline, despite the fact that, canonically we have a story about another timeline that still exists.
Well, depends on if when he says just one timeline, he's referring to the bigger scope timeline in which the 8th Amber Calamity is included, which is a fair interpretation, but it's kind of sketchy wording.
Makes sense. They
but again,
actually admit it is another timeline in game.
Yeah, And Yoshi P said, this is just my interpretation. It's not actually the canon of the game. You're welcome to have your interpretation, and that can be your canon, and it's just as valid. And I'm just like, no, because now we have all this fucked up timeline shit, and there's no consequence to any of it. There's no paradox. We can go back and mess with people, and nothing will happen because our timeline was generated due to whatever action the asshole of light went back and did before the world was sundered.
I mean, the
Now-
first thing that we did was in Elpis was go kill butterflies. So I mean, butterfly effect.
Yeah.
I love that. I wonder if they did that on purpose because that's such a beautiful little
I feel
thing.
like
if
they
so.
did that on purpose. I feel like they did. Additionally, I would say
hope
to
so.
the comment about him saying, well, your canon is just as valid as mine is. Well, I'm not the game director, though, is the
Yeah.
thing.
Like,
So
I
yours has at least a little bit more validity because you actually are actively involved and at the top of the pyramid of the people who make the
Yeah.
thing.
I really appreciate that they're really encouraging and welcoming of people creating their own versions, their own timelines, their own
That's
Which
stories
is
great.
within the
good.
game.
That's
But I
good.
still wish that they would be more firm on canon stuff because a lot of us want
Yes.
that.
Yes. We don't need every answer. We don't need everything answered. There should be some stuff that's left up to our interpretation. But at the same time, there are things that they need to be more concrete about as well to give a good foundation and to avoid these kinds of issues that you guys are bringing up.
Exactly.
Fao, what questions would you want to address?
Yeah, so the first, and actually it looks like it was addressed in chat a little bit, but the question was, why on earth would they think that Xenos is still alive? The truth about the comment that was made in the Q&A is that because of the location he's in, which is what is used in a previous answer to open doors, being able to use emotion to resurrect or stay alive, the community isn't quite sure. And then further in the materials, they mentioned that when a character is done in a story, you will get a minion. So there's no Xenos minion. Other
And
minions
there's no
are missing.
Emmet minions.
There's
There's no
No,
Emmet
no,
minion.
So
nor Hitler's.
that's all. That's all in the Q&A stream. So there's a lot of open doors, basically.
Can I just address one thing from the Q&A?
Yeah.
And it came up in chat. Alex brought it up about Xenos having dreams of the final days.
Never
and they're
addressed.
just like, and never addressed. And in the Q&A, they're like, oh, well, it's because, he was descended from Emmett Selk, blah, 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 through genetic memory, which to me is bullshit. Because when we get to Garlemald, Emmett Selk specifically states that he took some guy's body and just kind of rode around in it, which means that there was nothing genetic about Emmett Selk in that body. It was just
it's stated in the Encyclopedia Eorzea too. So they have physical and in-game lore written down, and they can't make up bullshit.
Like the only way that would have worked, is if there's a soul component to genetics, which is just
That's
like
what
a
I was
whole
gonna bring
other
up.
there's
We
a
could
whole
call it
other thing
memetics.
you can say about that, and it's like
That's
that isn't
yeah,
a step.
but the thing is that if we're going to discuss genetics, the discussion can turn a bit not safe for work, and I would understand why they went with.
Yeah.
Let's keep it simple.
Here's my question: where were Varys's dreams?
Well, he says that maybe
he's
there's
also
a
descended, and he's closer to generationally. He's closer to Emmett Selk than Xenos was.
Well, genetics aren't a guarantee.
I haven't had a chance.
It also disconnects with what Fan Daniel said that seemed to imply that Emmett had actively done
Found a
something
way.
to Xenos specifically, not just genetics.
Yeah.
Well, I always say that that's what Fan Daniel speculated, and knowing that who he is, who was actually, Aemon was a
technologist.
A technologist. It would make sense that the first thing that comes to his mind is, is it possible to do this by some genetic, when it could be as simple as.
Agreed. I agree with that in story. However, it's poor story writing to set something like that up as an expectation and then not follow through on it.
Fair. I mean,
yes.
I'm not saying. Sometimes there's some answers that interest me more than others, and this I'm like, okay, fine.
Going back to the topic of time travel, another thing that bothered me, we were incorporeal going back in time. He said that the gate was kind of half finished, half open. That was a bullshit answer too. I didn't like that answer at all. And then having the whole, well, we can see souls and everything. Your soul is part of Azim's. Hi, I'm Hithlodius, and this is Emmett. We'll just kind of give you a little bit of ether and bring you into the light.
See, for me,
Now,
I figured
okay.
that we appeared there as we were, as our
Yes.
sundered self, and it's just that everything else was so much more dense and rich and real and full of ether that we appeared washed out, and that they couldn't see
Agreed.
us because we were like kind of. Because if I'm imagining that even to Asians, our world, especially right after the Sun Ring,
And
probably
I
looked very
enjoyed the
ghostly.
fact that they brought the short stories into
Yes.
reality, like throughout the whole thing, the whole arc.
I was very pleased with that, them referencing
Yeah.
the short stories multiple times in Elpis.
But there were points where it just became like, okay, this is a bit of sloppy writing. Okay, this is a bit of sloppy writing. Okay, this, I know if someone is going to ask them later, they're going to give an answer that I'm going to be upset with.
Non-answer.
I feel so torn on it because there's so much in this zone that feels like such fan service directed at me specifically that I just can't hate it. But like I do agree on a fundamental level too that there was a lot of sloppy writing in this as well. For
I
those
think you can
reasons.
enjoy it. I think you can absolutely enjoy it, see flaws within it, and say, you know what? No, I still like it. I'm not even going
Agreed.
to worry about it. That's
Yeah.
I agree.
okay. It's okay to like things that aren't perfect.
Yeah.
I hope people like
Oh,
things that
yeah.
aren't perfect because I'm sure not.
I mean,
I was
Elvis
very
isn't
pleased.
perfect, and it's my favorite zone by a mile for lots of reasons.
I still love Endwalker, but that going back in time is one of the things that irks me the most about video games, and I hope
Yeah.
no game ever has to do it. There are ways you can do time travel, like time skips. Time skips going forward in time make more sense. The timeline
Personal-
continues
Sorry.
on the timeline continues on the same timeline, just the characters and the antagonists just kind of grow more powerful or less powerful. It's just a power shift. It basically is all it is.
Yeah. Personally, I think time travel works better as the core of a narrative than it does as anything appended onto it. Anytime you append time travel, it's liable to get messy. Whereas if you build your entire narrative around it, it tends to be a little less messy. It's still not going to be necessarily perfect, but
You're able to
And-
construct it
Yeah.
from the start with the events unfolding
And
as you see
that's
fit.
like, and that's what I was worried about because like as we ended on a fiend, and our Stantal, my friend, our journeyman lover, and had the scions go off on their different ways. Now we have a blank slate, and now we are brought to a scene with Elpis and Pandemonium, and I'm like, we're still building on the past, and I don't want to. I want us to move forward. Emmett Suck wanted us to go out and seek discovery and explore.
The whole expansion was about moving forward. It's literally like even in
And
the trailer, Forge Ahead.
and the whole thing was and he admitted at the end too, like the future that we saw was not the past that I loved. Well, why are we going back to the past then?
I mean, Pandemonium is
Good question.
is a side story. I wouldn't use Pandemonium to. I think it's far. We don't even know where Pandemonium is heading right now, and what might explain. That's for next year probably. So I prefer to withhold my judgment on Pandemonium, but I think it's actually some. It's not. I mean, it's if whatever we do in Pandemonium is probably something that we already did by the time of this when the story advances. So yeah. Anyways,
Yes, Vanessa, yes. Okay, Coberon, you have a rant. Let's hear it.
All right. So I agree with you, and I agree with Neela that time travel is best when it is fully integrated from the beginning. It's planned out. The best kind of time travel is the time travel that happens because it always happened and it always will happen, regardless of whatever supposed changes are made. A great example of this, I don't know if anyone's ever watched Babylon 5, where they plan time
Yes.
travel out from the beginning. That's how you do time travel. So in season 1, there's a time travel episode. You get half of the story. 2 seasons later, 2 years after this comes out, you get the other half of what happened. And the entirety of the show revolves around what happened in these 2 episodes. It sets up everything. And that was such a good way to do time travel in that it's so pivotal, but it's such a small part of the show as a whole. With Alexander, that was fine because it was, just a raid that was focused on time travel. It looked like a closed loop, even though they fragmented time into an infinite number of timelines, and they even say reality struggled to accommodate so many additional timelines, and it came close to the point of breaking, but it didn't. I was like, okay, that was a cool time travel story. I really liked it. Shadowbringers, they split off a timeline that because they changed, and they're like, okay, now when we're changing time, it's not staying in the same timeline. We're creating new timelines based on these actions, and they even covered that in one of the short stories. But now in Endwalker, they're like, oh no, it's one timeline, and they're just changing the events on that timeline, which I get if we essentially created our own timeline that we just stay on. But that doesn't mean that there aren't still other timelines, and that doesn't still mean that we haven't screwed something up, and it leaves the door open for the other theory that's floating around, which is that the original Asm is just us in the distant future, which is even more time travel. And it's just like, well, then if this is all stuff that we have done already and we can't change any of it, then what's the point? If it's all already predetermined, then like, do we actually have any will as a character? And it goes back to Heidelin, the theory that Heidelin tempered the Warrior of Light, which was totally untrue.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are in effect tempered to time due to our past and future actions, then it eliminates any threat because we already know we overcome everything that's going to be there in the future.
That's
So this
actually
is
a really interesting concept sorry, did you want to talk before?
just really
you
quick
do?
because it's topical to Koberon's point.
Oh, okay.
So this isn't completely a fallacy, but there's a little bit of fallacy in with this issue of determinism and timelines. The example I like to give, and I might lose the chat on this, but hopefully won't lose all of the cast. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien's honestly most important
Yes, it
book.
is. I love that book so much.
The concept of the god of the universe, Eru Iluvatar, and he's with the help of his angels,
The Ainur.
the Ainur. He's singing as a chorus. We are singing. These gods are singing the world into existence, but that's just kind of the preface. It's the way of planning out the entire plot line in a narrative arc that we don't see or witness. They're just singing a song, and then once the chorus is finished, they actually go to the physical work of creating the earth and world building, literally world building, and all of this. And even though every action is predetermined from the deity that is outside the system, it still requires the agency of all of the individuals in that world to create that future. So there is agency within the system. There is a being outside of the system that knows all. That would be the time space. That would be fate. But it's like a box that we're in, but we're still acting inside that box. I had better words for this a few weeks ago. But that's what Endwalker kind of feels like to me. It feels like there is a fate or a sacred timeline, but we still have to act within it, because to give up acting is it's somehow to give up and not act in a universe is somehow like a fundamental sin of being. If you exist,
It's a
you should
meta
act.
commentary. It's a kind of like meta commentary on the idea of free will versus determinism.
That's right.
Relative to what the end singer represents, which is you give up, you die, there's nothing, game over. So even if it's all plotted out beforehand, even if it's all plotted out beforehand, you're still acting, you're still living, you're still experiencing, You're still having a life. You don't necessarily have all of the contours of what's been determined, even if there is time travel and whatnot. So even if you have an illusion of free choice or not, you're still experiencing those things. It wasn't necessarily a waste.
So I do want to add that there is one caveat to my perception of how this is going, which is that if it's not all predetermined and there are actually changes being made, we're just experiencing those changes after the fact. What it could be is they're just ignoring the time traveler's exclusion principle, which is to say that in time travel stories, the time traveler usually is aware of the changes that happen. But if they aren't observing that and are just saying that, well, these changes happened, but they led to the result of a different world that we remember as the world we've always played through, then yeah, we're able to change the timeline, but we changed it into the timeline that we experienced.
Right. So
which
we're living
is-
what we're
Yeah.
making.
which is really confusing, I know, but it makes sense in my head.
I'm sitting here cackling because my entire like new canon fix-it story uses this exact concept.
I think it's on point, honestly, because
I haven't told you guys about it. That's funny as hell.
that's good. One
Well,
brain cell, right?
That actually
myself-
came out of a conversation I had with Moose. That we talked at
Nice.
length about this.
I have been thinking
yeah.
at length about it as well.
Well, I'm familiar with this. In the thing I'm writing now, I'm using Final Fantasy 13 to time travel mechanics, adapting them to 14, and yeah, I'm thinking about the 13 trilogy. What you said, Cobb, about like the ultimate foe, perhaps to try to defeat is not actually despair, but fate itself. It's kind of reminds me of some of the arc words for 13 being fighting fate.
That's
And it's kind of
it's a
Yeah.
trope they use in almost every Final Fantasy, fighting against the established the way the river of time is flowing. You always are the counter agent.
I really need to find the time to script that thing about the trilogy, but it's just so many things. I'm just how
Just do it.
Just do it a piece at a
How?
time. That's how you do it. You do it. It's like, how do you take a journey of 1,000 miles? Well, you take a step.
Yeah, you draw a circle and then you finish the owl.
Anyways.
So we
Anyways.
we leave the crystal tower and we go back in time and we end up in a room.
Yes.
A room
So
with giants that looks very
I
familiar.
love this scene, and I was just thinking, please don't be please don't be a duty. Please don't. Be
I
a
felt
duty.
like when I walked into that room, my first impression was there's absolutely no way this is anything but just a room, and they're just fucking with me right now. Like there's no way. So I'm wandering around this room just like, okay, this is pretty awesome. I like being here, but like there's no way this is more than just a room, right? And then everything else happens after that. I'm screaming.
This was the only
I
scene where I actually vocalized, like, basically screaming.
I've seen so many people's reactions to that, and I actually heard like a couple hours into going through Elpis, I was in Discord with one of my partners, and she had gotten to this point. I listened to her have the same reaction of just like that incoherent screaming of like, "Oh my god!"
Is
Yeah.
it sad
Real.
that the only time that I smiled was when I'm watching other people react to it and not me?
It is a little
I mean,
sad.
it's
Yeah.
like that when you're sometimes it's like that when you're playing and you're just very invested or into it.
Yeah, like I liked all the stuff that came before this point, but this was like the turning point where I was like, "Oh my god, I love this expansion."
So we have two characters teleport in off screen. You hear the teleport noise. You hear
Yeah.
voices. This is when I started reacting. I was something like,
As soon as they did that, I knew it was going to be him and his friend, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm
Oh, no.
doomed."
I
And then I
actually recognize Hythlodaeus' voice, even though we only heard it
Yes.
a little bit.
Yes.
I have a real like spot on talent for voice recognition. I sometimes will hear a song and be like, "Oh, I didn't know that band had a new album out." I do it all the time, and I immediately recognized it.
Yeah, he started speaking like first, and I was like, "Oh no, this is just like with Zodiac." So it has to be him next to him, and and it was him, and it was like, "Oh my god!" And then they show us their faces, and it's like, "Oh my god!"
And then the first Hades' side glance, I was like,
I haven't the
I
foggiest what
laughed.
you're
I
talking
also
about.
laughed. Oh, it's so like him. I
Oh,
don't want
yes.
any trouble. Leave me alone. That's not there. That's not there.
I don't see it. I do not perceive it.
It was at this moment when I realized exactly the proper meaning of Emmet Silkseed being Gemini, but the twins were more or less Hades and Hythlodaeus. One being, the symbol of theater,
Mhm.
especially tragicomedy, with one of the Greek masks being the sad, grumpy one, and the one being the happy one.
Mhm.
These are literally Hades and Hythlodaeus.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Oh, I love this
when
scene so much.
and then of course there's the thing that Hythlodaeus could have been Emmet Silk, but but yes, I mean, I was like, I recall myself being like, I think at that point it was like 4 in the morning, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to bed tonight. I was too busy key smashing in DMs to Arden.
I liked the not only did he want nothing to do with it, but especially if it's the spitting image of a convocation member.
And it's
It's-
her or him, rather, like
yeah.
specifically that person,
Yeah.
our
Just more.
friend.
Yeah.
Hythlodaeus was like, they must have sent them, and it's like, no, there's no way they would have been here themselves.
If they
And
wanted to
then
be
in
here,
essence,
they would have been here.
in
And
essence,
and the
we're
dread
there.
matches.
But I think the moment that actually made my brain go into error 4004 was when Hythlodaeus opens the gates of Propylion, and the introduction says the world on Sunder. I was like, are you
Yep,
fucking
it's
kidding
real.
me?
It's real. It's a zone you can go back to. And I was like, oh my god.
Are you
You
fucking
crazy people did it. You actually did it.
I mean, anyway, that's one of the one of the zones. It's very much like the Tempest and Amoret. Like, you want to go back in time, have no memory, and re-experience what you felt the very
Yep.
first time you went through it.
Yep.
So
I know. I've seen things floating around on the internet. If you could erase one memory, what would it be? Well, it would be that one, and it would be for that reason, because I want to experience it anew. I'll keep all my terrible memories just to experience that one a second
even
time.
as fleeting and short as it was.
Hmm.
It's
It's a heavy zone despite being so beautiful and fun, especially at the beginning.
Yes.
Like, it gets heavier and heavier to the point where at the end of it, I had to take like breaks repeatedly.
the pacing was good in that sense, in that like it starts out and this is a dream, it's a Garden of Eden, it's on the edge of heaven,
Mhm.
and like slowly things start piling up. You already know what's going to happen, at least in general, but things start building bit by bit, and you're like, oh,
I mean,
oh no.
We have visions of Paradise Lost.
Even though there's that some of kind of amusing, lighthearted scene when Hades has to train the Charybdis to fly, and Hythlodaeus is telling us chatting with us about Hades and himself and Asum, and then there comes a moment when it seems all like very very lighthearted and heartwarming, and then Hythlodaeus says that line about, so when they have fulfilled their respective duties, so too shall I fulfill mine, and together we shall return to the star. And I think that was the first moment that hit me, that fuck, they will never actually do this, and you realize that all that your experience is pretty much doomed, and it's like a pall is cast over Elpis from that moment onwards, that you realize that all these people and all this beauty is going to just be gone forever, and no one's going to remember it.
In the same
Yeah.
fleeting moment, we must live, die, and know.
And
One of
then
the
you
things
get
that-
to really understand why Emmett felt the way that he did.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was really interesting, and apparently people didn't understand this because they also addressed it in the Q&A. There's a scene where Hermes is ranting about death and dying, and how it's not ideal. and he just says, what happens once the planet is perfect? Are we supposed to all just kind of smile and say, okay, we can die now, and everybody collectively decides they can die, which is exactly what happened on Deca
The
Hepta.
Plenty.
Yeah,
On the
Yeah,
Plenty.
Deca Hepta, which is Rala's planet, praise
Ugh.
be Rala. And so it was very apparent that the ancients were on that path. And I just thought
feel
that
like
was
the
very
humans.
interesting.
Sorry. I feel like the ancients were way too human for that. Humans create drama when bored.
Agreed.
Humans do not commit suicide when they are bored. They go stir shit.
although
Agreed. Actually, they have a fucking member of government whose job it is to start
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
for
As-
So
real.
it's like I don't think it was inevitable.
I
Although-
understand that
Because
that's the
it-
story they wanted to
like-
tell, but it fell flat for me in that moment because it was so
Yes.
inhuman. It was
I
so
have-
impossible for me to
that's-
connect with.
Agreed. Yeah, I feel like
It's
they
similar,
just needed a chance to have a
but
dialogue.
I think it's similar, but not necessarily the same. Like, besides, the dead ends are basically Meteon's memories and impressions. So you can't take Meteon's memories and impressions to be a reliable narration.
They're not word of God, yeah.
Exactly.
because
so,
we know she was responsible for the last two.
Exactly.
dying.
The Plenty was what the Plenty's mass suicide was Meteon's intervention. What actually sparked the creation of Rala and the ancients are actually different because in the end, if you recall, I'm getting way ahead, but when Meteon muses on when we share our journey with her, and in the end, after the trial, and then she says that which Hermes sent us to find was there all the time in Atheris, and for me that means the sundering didn't have had to happen because all this hope and love and dreams, they were already there. So the ancients didn't have to pay for that.
No, that's not quite true, though, because the dialogue choice you can choose is we created it together, meaning everything up
that's
to that point led to this.
I personally disagree, but everyone's
I-
interpretation is pretty fair there.
There's one of the possible answers, but it wasn't always there. I don't think it refers to the ancients. The ancients the ancients had loved ones. The ancients had ambitions. The ancients had dreams. It's just that they won't feel
Passions,
that it's
hopes.
exactly. I think the thing is, they're basically immortal, and if anything, they understood better than any other race that everything has to have an end, and so they chose their own end. So they
Exactly.
don't disregard mortality. It's just
Mhm.
that for them it's important, but
What about-
it's of their choosing. But they are aware that they're going to come back in another form and start again.
What about our
So-
metaphorical truth scene as we're leaving Elpis, where it's indicated
we
that
should
the
fix that
populace at
later.
large...
Go ahead, Cobron. You were trying to say something.
Yeah, no, I wanted to address Aetheris being the last bastion of hope. I don't think that was something that was necessarily created post-sundering, because we know that when Midgard-Sormr left to go to Aetheris, that was after Meteon had already gone there, because there's really no other way for him to know about Aetheris unless he learned about it from Meteon. And so they would have already regarded Aetheris as the last bastion of hope and might have known what was going on all the other stars, or just might have been in the middle of the Omicrons wiping everyone out, or I don't know what. But before, I assume, the Sundering, when Meteon visited their world and they left, they already regarded it as the last bastion of hope. So it was already a planet of hope before the Sundering.
Yeah, agreed. The problem is in the end it all stems from one person asking the wrong question. and I can't fault Hermes actually, because it's fair to question the way of, I mean, he has fair points to observe. But
The thing that got me with him was that he asked these questions. He asked his colleagues, he asked his friends, and he always got kind of blown off or told, well, your question's illogical, so you shouldn't feel this way. Well, that doesn't make the emotion go away. It's important to learn to deal with the emotion, and he didn't get that.
I think the lesson of this zone is that they're having trouble dealing with emotion. We have that from the very beginning. We have notes of the flower not changing except in very few people's presence. We do have the scene at the end of Elpis where it's indicated the people by and large want a world free from sorrow. They're speaking for the population at large, not just a group of 8 or 10 people, the way I took it
wouldn't say a
narratively.
problem with emotion. I would say that their perspective on things is naturally different. Dealing with emotion, it's just that they have. Perhaps it seems like. Perhaps it seems like that because their world basically has no real conflicts in the way Sander the Theorist does, but they do have their own tribulations, so to speak.
I kind of looked at it a little bit like the difference between how elves in Middle Earth and men in Middle Earth experience emotion and conflict and reckon with those things. Like they both experience like at least a basic similarity of reaction, but the fundamentals of it are very different, and that given their longer lifespans, their different focus for like creation and pushing the bounds of what is possible using the energy force that they know about, they had a different perspective regarding like actually dealing with emotion as anything other than just like a more limited sense of empathy. Like everybody's assumed to be part of the collective, everybody's assumed to be happy, everybody's assumed to be working towards the betterment of everyone else at all times, and that, like Emmett Salk says to Hermes when they're trying to recruit him to Fandaniel, is that your duty is your life, and when you complete your duty, that is your happiest moment before you also then return to the star to start again. Whereas for like the Sundered life, they're a lot more concerned with even just surviving day to day, and they're not necessarily thinking about anyone else but themselves.
We'll
for
have
good
to
or
check.
for ill.
I think, Sarah, you're onto something with that.
Yeah, I think people tend to oversimplify what for a nation actually means to complete one's duty. I've seen people assuming it's just one purpose in their life, but could be many purposes in life. And then when they consider this this combination of duties done, and then they're away. I mean, it doesn't have to be just one.
I was speaking with a friend about this in DMs recently and saying, I'm kind of, at first I was very off put by and then we return to the star by our will. And I'm like, that's weird. But more and more it grows on me and is like, that would be really nice, because I'm like looking at all my writing work in project, all my crafting stuff. And I'm like, if I could actually finish everything before I died and be certain that everything was tied up and good, that'd be so nice. That's never going to happen. That is not going to happen.
But
not dying. Like dying is a painful thing to like. I don't just mean like the end of a life. I mean physically, your physical body dying is generally not a comfortable experience. Like imagine if it could be something less painful. That would be fucking awesome.
I've had close experience with the concept of going passing away without suffering instead of that with it hits close. And I understand that the ancients way of going is way better than dying in pain and suffering, but that's another story.
It
so
is
I want to
relevant,
address what Pharaoh Man said, and this kind of in line with how I thought about it. I was just driving home from the other work, and I was like, if once the final days happened, that was kind of the end of paradise, and once they summoned Zodiark, I feel like it would have been a similar to case to kind of like the butterfly effect, where you keep trying to change it and change it and change it and get what you want. And I feel like had the Sundering not happened, they would have just continued sacrificing to Zodiark, trying to get that perfect paradise back, but it was gone.
I agree completely with Cobran on this, and I
They would
do want
never
to.
have gotten it back.
I want
and
to
it
state
would've
my
gone.
opinion really quick. The reason I brought this up earlier, just a few minutes ago. We're still talking about it. It's great. But I had wrote in our chat just so I didn't forget. With the final days happening, it's like as soon as something truly awful happens, they give their all to remake the past rather than step forward to create a future. They're seeking a world free of sorrow. That was the direct line. So they
It's
have
very
issues.
tempting.
They have issues processing grief and loss and moving into the future. They want their perfect past. They want their paradise.
That's
And
so true of humans, though.
it's
of
incredibly
us.
true, for sure. And we come in this world. We come from them, and this is
But-
why Heidelin took those actions in the story. Right? It wasn't the saving the world. It wasn't the averting the final days. It was continuing to use this this will of the world to try to get back what you've lost, or like Cobran said, you're just going to keep trying to get back to the beginning. But we're beyond that now. This is the future now. Move forward. So no
Would
longer
they-
shall
would-
we have wings to move
Would
to the
they?
past.
Because I'm not entirely sure. They could try to bring back. They try to restore the world and readdress the laws of nature that had been broken by the final days. But I don't think necessarily that. They would have they would have kept trying to appeal to Zodiac, because there's one thing that they can't. After being struck by the final days, even if the Sundering hadn't happened, there would have come a moment in which, the moment the final days start to happen, they are fundamentally changed because they now have to face loss and death and sorrow and destruction. And for people who have never or have no memory, because we don't know their past, their past, basically their history, for people who basically have no memory of this kind of trauma and grief, being so forcefully snatched away from their comfort place, it's perfectly understandable that they wanted to hold onto something, basically. And but as if the Sundering hadn't happened, they would have inevitably been changed. They were already changed, in fact, because if they were really, if the ancients were really apathic people, that would surrender to destruction, I mean, the shades in the moon actually speak that Zodiac, the sacrifice was motivated by pure hope that those that some people would live through their sacrifice. So I don't think it's a case of, they would have found hope, in my opinion, but it would have taken time. And time was, and this situation was what I think was Venat's greatest
Crime.
yes, I was going to say mistake, or or I already spoken about this. I think the Warrior of Light was indirectly or sort of directly responsible for Vena losing her own hope in the people of the present, of her present, instead gambling everything on the people of the future. And if Hades' stance on the past was unhealthy, then hers was the same amount of unhealthy. So yeah.
Oh, I agree. I also think that was somewhat addressed in the Q&A, where that was just kind of a perspective the ancients had, where they had that hubris where they were like, I know what's best for everybody and I'm going to do it. So I think that, yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah.
Cobran, so you had another thing to say about the narrative. Why don't you go into that?
Yeah, so sorry. There's something that a narrative device called Chekhov's gun that 14 has always been really good about sticking to, and ever since Heaven's Word, when they started bringing stuff back up again, I was like, oh man, everything that comes back comes back in some way, and they address it and they close it out. And that's one of the greatest things that I love about this game. And I think that Endwalker is the first time I've been disappointed where they had narrative hooks that they just kind of dropped.
Yeah.
And when they said, we had enough potential to carry Heidelin and Zodiark through 8.0 and address everything, and I was like, 8.0 might have been a bit extreme, but I wish we would have gotten one more expansion, because I feel like there are so many things narratively that I care about that have just kind of been tossed to the
Like when
wayside.
we were shoved Zodiark into our first trial.
That's
Yeah.
right. What I mentioned with maybe they should have just added an additional trial, right? Like have Anima be an 8-man trial, even
But
though
even beyond that,
yeah.
though, like there should have been, I think, an expansion's worth of content resolving Zodiark, then Heidelin, if that
Yeah.
like to kind of go off of that, especially to give more closure to Elidibus's character, but also to like really dig into like what it meant as a primal, like that hope, that salvation, what it actually meant as like what the true full scope of its intention was to save the world.
Yes.
Where we got,
Yeah.
I feel like, a fuller rendition of what Heidelin's intention was, but not necessarily Zodiark's. In
Yeah,
the
and another thing that's kind of tied into that is that it was kind of obvious they hadn't thought through all of their plot elements from that Q&A. And I'm sorry I keep dragging us from Elpis back to that Q&A, but there was a lot of good and a lot that just made me scratch my head. One of the things being, now that we have all the souls that were inside Zodiark plunged back into the life stream, they're going to be born into bodies. And Yoshi P didn't really was like, well, that hasn't really happened before, so we don't really know what would happen. And I'm sitting there thinking, I know exactly what would happen. You'd have a bunch of kids who'd have creation magics, use the aether in their bodies, and suddenly they're dead. That's what would happen. So it was just kind of disappointing that they hadn't really thought a lot of this through, and it was kind of apparent from some of his answers.
They had an idea of what the story was that they wanted to tell, but they didn't get into every nitty gritty detail in necessarily the way that they probably should have when it came to stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like for me, when I write a story, sometimes the story goes in a way I wouldn't plan or I didn't intend. And instead of wrangling it, I'll either change my fundamental stuff so that it naturally goes the way I want it to, or I will accept that it's a new and different story. It felt like they tried to force it. And that's part of why I don't regard Endwalker as highly as I do Shadowbringers, which felt much more cohesive to me.
I agree.
I mean, I don't know if you agree with this. I really enjoy Endwalker, of course, but Endwalker feels more like an epic finale than Shadowbringers feels in terms of emotional impact. Endwalker is like the epic conclusion that, of course, it's the grand finale. But Shadowbringers has a whole different level of narrative power in the sense of everything you believe, everything you believe until now is turned um, all on your
It
head.
makes you question your morals a lot more.
Yes.
Endwalker, it hits you in the feels in certain scenes because you're looking back on 10 years of playing the game. But that being said, when you're not feeling those feels, you're walking around in a half-broken narrative. And that's not what I wanted for a finale. I want to go from Shadowbringers, which, I mean, this is what I said earlier, like, Shadowbringers set the bar super high. So I was like,
Yeah,
going into
it really
Endwalker.
did.
So I was going into Endwalker like, man, they've got to shatter this. They've got the player base. They've got the money to do this. They've got the devs team to, really do it. And I walked in and I'm like, this is raising more questions. And I don't feel like they are answering them. And I don't feel like they're closing things out like they said they are. And we're going back in time now. That's just wonderful. Okay, here's a little bit of tears here and there, and we're done with Heidelin and Zodiark, and why do I feel empty?
So, Now that's all. Now all that said, it is important to remember that Shadowbringers didn't really feel like it was completely done until 5.3, but definitely, at least with regards to 6.0.
If they had shut down the servers after 5.3, that would have been it. That everyone would
I
have
mean,
cheered and clapped.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Whereas
It
with
was a good stopping
6.0,
point.
yeah, whereas with 6.0, it feels like they're in a rush to get to somewhere else, and it's leaving a lot of broken pieces behind.
Oh, we don't really know exactly what the patches are going to be story wise. So I would
And yeah,
I in that sense I'm the one who withholds judgment no, until
and they
well
have a
you know
track record of
you
ambiguous
know me.
answers too.
They do. I mean, all they mentioned
mean-
in the pre-materials was that this would be the end. 6.0 would be a self-contained expansion ending the Hydaelyn versus Zodiac arc. They didn't say anything about not carrying threads forward. So,
Right.
Hmm.
you know,
There's probably going to be a few things that do get resolved, but I'm still not necessarily hopeful or expecting that everything gets resolved. And there may
And
end up
it's
being things that are
yeah.
always going to be disappointing.
But yeah, anyways, so should we touch on the controversial in the fandom or divisive element of Dynamis?
Let's do it.
Because I mean, we don't take
This
very
is the
much
time for it.
time to get through Elpis before we start talking to Hermes, and he brings up Dynamis, and we reference what Nadana told us about Akasha.
Hmm. I have to say,
So-
Dynamis is knowing. I mean, coming from the 13th trilogy, and those who are familiar with the 13th trilogy, they will know that Dynamis is at the core the concept of chaos. I was like, you recall when when before launch, when it was the launch trailer and the people were turning into Terminus beasts, and I was like, that transformation sequence reminds me of something, and then Endwalker happened, and I was like, okay. And that's well, anyways Dynamis is really I think the one of the core points of being divisive is the fan base difference of opinions on the ancients being able to use it or no.
use it
Dynamis
yes,
is
detect it easily no.
Dynamis
It's
is
difficult-
just My Chemical Romance's latest single.
Oh my god.
Go ahead, Neela.
It's basically an analog for dark matter, though, right?
Yes, it is.
No, it
I
is
mean,
not.
No?
It is
well-
an analog. So I was about to say it's an analog
Yeah.
for dark energy, not dark matter.
Okay.
Yeah,
makes more sense
yeah,
then.
yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
Dark energy makes up exactly 68.3% of the universe. Regular matter or ether in 14 is only 4%. And one of the things I think is interesting is that means there's still 27% of something out there that we know nothing about in the game.
Unknown. Which is very interesting.
It's a really
It's a
cool
good
And
universe.
that would be
Yeah.
dark matter.
Hermes was
Yes.
very intrigued by its
Well,
potential.
And here's the thing is, and this is a thing I've wondered about creation magic before. It seems like Emmett Sulk created a shade in Amrot, Hythlodaeus, that can see more sharply than him. It does make sense because we as humans make tools that can do things that we cannot. So I'm not sure if Hermes learned how to manipulate Dynamis in order to make Median, or if he used ether to create a thing that can create Dynamis. I really want to know more about the creation magic. I'm sure we'll never get detailed lore on it. It just doesn't seem like a priority. But it's just something that fascinates me. Can you create something that can do
Or can you
something that you
mold
cannot?
it?
Yes. How,
I mean,
like,
yeah.
can you create a Dynamis engine, essentially, with ether, or do you have to learn how to manipulate Dynamis?
Mm-hmm. Since it's
It's an
driven by
interesting question.
emotion, I feel like it would be a much harder lift.
Absolutely. There's also a sort of beautiful irony in Hermes, who is so emotional and struggles with his emotions, being fascinated with, studied, and possibly, maybe, theoretically able to use Dynamis. If any ancient could, I would see him as more inclined because he's very emotional.
This is important to the plot threads as well because I mean, going back to the prior discussion we were having about whether the sundering was important or not, and my comment on the ancients, not that they didn't have emotions, but they weren't practiced in dealing with suffering. Once you sunder and people are dying for 12,000 years for regular life stuff, maybe part of the plan was to give people who have much less ether a lot more practice with using emotional energy.
I think that might have been what Vana ultimately landed on as a compromise, because it
I
feels
like
like
that. Sorry.
you go ahead.
I say I like that as a theory, and it's so baffling to me that they picked the Warrior of Light, who is the most dense soul that they know of ethereal density. Like it feels really backwards to me, and I don't like that.
You still need to be
Yeah.
strong enough to fight. Yeah. So 8
were
rejoinings were
trying to
required.
Why
find-
can't Dynamis do that? Is ether the only kind of strength? I want to know more.
Oh yeah,
It feels
exactly.
like they were trying to imply you needed to find someone who could have a balance of both.
You need someone who's
At
an
the
absolute
same-
badass who can
At
At
also
the
was
do the
same
thing.
upgrade.
time, at the same time, that's Dynamis is if Dynamis is even mostly an explored territory even for the ancients. What Hermes told us about Dynamis in essence, ether in essence negates Dynamis could be a wrong. Could be he's a scientist. He basically also studies hypotheses and posits them. So at the time, they don't. Even the ancients don't have all the data. They operate with their reality and their world, and they all they know is that Dynamis is not under normal conditions as powerful as ether. But then we go to the Warrior of Light, who whose soul becomes denser in ether. It also makes them more powerful in Dynamis, and it's like maybe what Hermes
But
told us is
that
not
would imply that the
necessarily.
ancient. Sorry.
So no, uh, we've seen ancients that are able to limit break, which is basic dynamis, under certain conditions. They know exactly what they do when they design trust. They program them to do stuff according to their lore. And if ancients wouldn't be able to use dynamics, they wouldn't be able to limit break. And
Yeah, but
Hades, Hythlodaeus, and Vena, they all can limit break. And
this
surely
is another
Aslan
example. This is another example of them playing show and tell, but they're showing one thing and telling another. They tell us ancients can't really manipulate Dynamis because they're too ethereally dense. You'll have to chase after Medion because you can hear her voice and we can't. And then they show them doing limit breaks, which are, I seem to recall, identical to the ones we do. So it's like, which way do you want it? It's just another show tell disconnect. There's been a fair number of them in Endwalker.
Go ahead, Core.
My thought was mainly in terms of like, I get the sense that the Sundered were more capable of Dynamis, but were unaware of it, like the Ancients, and so couldn't actively use it. The Ancients were more in Aether, and were not completely incapable of emotion or the manipulation of Dynamis as a result of that critical point. But because of the mixture of their reliance on Aether, their unawareness of Dynamis, and just like a whole host of different factors, they were not well equipped to handle what then came about from Hermes asking his question and Medion giving an intelligence to Dynamis with that negative implication, what became the final days. So Vanal looked at that situation and like whatever their intention for her in the story, regardless of like just putting that aside for a moment, I still kind of got the sense that it made a lot more sense to have her thought process be the only way you're going to get the individual who has come to my time and shown me this problem and has now, like through us going through Elpis together and figured out what happened with Hermes and Medion, the only way we're going to resolve this problem is by trying to find an individual who's able to use both. And that you're not going to get that very easily. You're certainly not necessarily going to get that in a straightforward manner that like you create someone. You have to try and she was looking at it like almost like in an an Zem perspective of like, you need to create someone who's going to tackle the problem head on and has to reach the point where they can tackle the problem head on by having gone through the process of adventure. As cliche as that might sound, like um, they have to have formed bonds with people and experienced emotion on the level that an Azem, probably more so than most ancients, would have been more intimately aware of, but who is still aetherically powerful enough to overcome a lot of the problems that they have to face in an aetherically dense world, even one that's sundered.
And who
And
better than the
so-
one?
But
Yeah.
then we face the moral choice of all of it. Instead of one life for one world, it becomes one world for one life.
I feel like she probably still gambled that like this one life was still valuable enough for everything that he or she, like whoever, that they told her about. Like we gave her like the whole rundown of everything we had done, and she was moved by that, and she saw value in it, and she wanted to give it a chance to be able to live, even if it meant at the expense of her own world, which she had her own, like, whatever like viewpoint she might have had about it. She would have perhaps thought that this might have actually been like the better way. Did she have the right to decide that for everyone? Probably not. Did they have the right to decide their decision for like what to do with Zodiac? Like for everyone? Probably not either. Like it was just people making decisions in response to extreme circumstances with
Yeah.
what knowledge and beliefs that they had. And we have to make the best of that now. We've just been handed everything from these individuals on that basis. Hermes asking his question, and Hades and Vana coming up with different answers, and we're kind of the synthesis of those answers to some extent.
I
And now we
so
just
agree
have to
with
kind
that.
of deal
Yeah,
with that.
they're flawed. They're human in the end, so that's the point, I guess. We make the same mistakes at the ancients. Sorry, the ancients are as flawed as we are, basically.
And the things that they created were just as flawed as they were. Zodiac and Hyland both. Conceptions of deities that were fundamentally flawed by their creation from imperfect beings.
One more thing to add on that as well. We shouldn't forget, or we should try not to forget at least, that the implication of the cutscene at the end of Elpis is that having tried with foreknowledge to keep the final days from occurring, they still failed. And in that circumstance, Hydaelyn sunders.
Wait, which foreknowledge? I'm sorry.
So us coming to Elpis and telling Vana and everyone about the final days and what happened and what a jackass Solus was and all of this.
Yep.
All of this. This is the foreknowledge. So even with the
Well, they didn't
knowledge,
retain it though.
but Vana did.
Only Vana retained
Vana-
it.
Vana
And she
retained it.
chose. Vana could have gone and said, "I can explain exactly what's doing this." She
Oh,
could
no.
have just said everything except it's actually Medion. She could say, "There's something out there doing this." She could have told them everything.
This is my biggest
Exactly.
criticism,
See,
and I agree
Fandaniel
with you.
Hermes, as the new Fandaniel, figured out the general basis of how it's working, how it was affecting the ethereal currents. He just didn't have enough time and information, as far as we can determine, to
find the
fully
source.
figure it all out. If she'd given him a shortcut, they probably could have solved it.
Yep.
But she chose not to. She could have put an anti-tempering protection that she has on even any of the convocation members, let alone all of them. She did not.
Yeah. So these are the
She-
criticisms
she
I would agree
don't-
with you on.
Yeah.
She made a
I-
conscious decision.
I have something to build on that, which really bothers me. We've been told since the beginning that the echo that the ancients had was far more powerful than the echo that we have. In fact, Elidibus refers to it as an echo of a symphony. And I didn't really get that impression from Elpis. I feel like had the echo worked the way Vana tells us, where if we are using the echo on someone that's recalling a memory, we can see that memory. She could have easily gone up to anyone else, Emmett Selk or Hythlodaeus, and said, "Hey, use the echo on me. See what actually happened." And they would have known it's fact because it's her memories remembering that. And she could have easily reminded them of what happened.
And she
during
teaches
their
us how
time
to
in
do it.
Elpis. Yeah.
She knows how to do it.
This
She
also
actively puts it
being-
into effect.
Yeah, this also being an extension of when we're telling them our story about the future, why didn't we whip out the Azem crystal to show them so that they could like have a visual aid and see that it was made with Hades' ether and be
Yeah.
like, well, that kind of lends credence to what you're saying. Like,
I-
sure,
I don't
I
think
was
that. I
screaming.
don't think that was
Infladeus
that
and
was the
Venat bought it,
problem.
but like,
I
I
don't
was
think that was the
screaming during that
problem.
scene to show him the stone.
That's hardly the problem. I mean, later Hades says that the convocation is basically knows if you're lying or not. His reaction was not because he didn't believe us. His reaction is because he couldn't cope with it. That's it's.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah, you guys have the
sure.
stone. Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yep.
I don't know. I feel like that's probably true, Meowth, but I would still have preferred that they had
Yeah,
actually
well,
gone
fair.
into that thread a bit more and actually like
Oh yeah.
showed the player. Yeah, they would have actually been able to suss that out. Because yeah, we're dealing with a character who's also well known to be like saying one thing meaning another.
Yeah, well, that's fair. But
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah. But I'm quite intrigued because, well, I think I'm going to save this one for Ultima Thule. Anyways.
Oh, that'll be a good one too.
The bottom line, I think, for this part is that given enough time, there was nothing to say they were going to end up like Raw Law Civilization. They could have potentially figured out Dynamis. What they choose to do with it afterwards, I mean, is anybody's guess, but they would have been able to avert either having the Medion situation at all, or at the very least being able to combat it directly, like with full knowledge of what is causing it, and be able to avert it that way without a Zodiarch or a Hydaelyn. But they were denied that opportunity by Venat making a conscious decision and by Hermes asking his question in the first place. Although Hermes asking his question in the first place is also just a commentary on how every society, no matter how utopian, can have people on its margins who, for whatever reason, feel like they aren't being listened to and turn outward for answers. And the answers they find may not always be the good ones or the right ones, and ones that have implications for people who are in the society.
He turned to drugs.
Dynamis is a hell of a drug, yes.
In the end, Medion is a victim of all this too. So yeah.
Absolutely. Medion was a fascinating achievement of creation that could have taught them so much, but ended up being corrupted by existentialism and despair.
So,
Don't send an
yeah.
empath to a world of despair with
We
a
went
question.
on
Or 100
quite-
of them.
Didn't know it would be.
Or thousands
on-
of them. How many birds are in that fight?
I don't know
That's-
that this
Hundreds,
is
it seems
quite
like.
a tangent because Elpis is all about talking about this stuff. Like otherwise we would have just been like a literal rendition of we go from point A to point B and we get to see the behemoth and et cetera, et cetera.
We never left the lobby, which actually it's impressive that we went on today so much about just time travel.
Well, it doesn't help that time travel makes the timeline non-linear in a way that we can't talk about it in a purely linear
Right.
fashion. It makes sense.
Exactly. And I mean, we wouldn't even have an Elpis without this
We're
subject
doing our
matter,
best.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I do want to preface everything we've said. I do love this expansion. I did love the Elpis
Yeah.
part.
Agreed.
I
Yes.
just have a lot of concerns.
Same. And the answers that they gave us last night were
speaking of the
or
speaking
Friday
of
night
the-
were
Yeah. Some of those answers were good. The runs later as they went along were progressively worse and worse to the point where people were actively like, well, we don't see it. We don't acknowledge it. Screw you.
And that's the thing though, like because you play through the expansions in Shadowbringers, you get a ton of answers that you were dying to hear from the previous expansions going to Endwalker. This doesn't make sense to Shadowbringers. This doesn't make sense to Stormblood. What are we?
I feel like we could have gotten a lot more answers than we got and felt a lot more satisfied. Details of Zodiarch summoning, etc.
In any case, I think it's important a detail from Live Letter last night regarding the last scene of the Elpis segment because they specifically mentioned Venat's group and the recording of 5.2, which means that this still holds up and the final scene is basically just an illustration of the lyrics of answers and a recap, if anything, of Venat's account of the Sundering. So it's not exactly what happened. You know,
even though it's presented as such.
presented as such because it's meant to be symbolic, that as we speculated, but after last night's
Friday night.
Friday night. Sorry, Friday night. Yeah, Friday night Q&A. I think it's safe to say that that's just meant to represent something, not how the events actually happened. But that's when we discuss those things. We can go in depth because it's late.
Oh yeah. Speaking of, are we at time?
We are over time, and I'm actually really
Slightly
pleased because normally we do try to end exactly on time, but even though we talked about time travel the whole way, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
What have you done with the background?
So Cobran just finished
Creation
uploading
magic.
his creation
Yes.
magic to our Google Drive, and this is the chat version of the Heidelin background he made.
Oh.
So I didn't mention this at the front of the stream, but Cobran's our artist when it comes to the backgrounds and the animations. So Meowth does our custom beautiful character art, and Cobran is in charge of this kind of stuff. And it's always crazy when we see the results. I'm so impressed, dude.
Thank you.
Give the spotlight to Cobb. He doesn't get as much credit as he should.
It's true. He
And
does
we
a
do
lot.
take Neela
We love you,
seriously.
Cobb.
Okay, Conspirator dude.
Thank you.
You were the La Brea of our convocation.
It's fucking true. Take a break, dude.
I'll do this when I'm taking.
You were so like your creations.
You burn bright.
Are you experiencing ethereal shackles too?
Alex,
Uh-oh.
the Swan guy, says, "Feed Elidibus to the Twitch service. So you can go over time without remorse." No, we'll just travel back in time about 15 minutes so that
Please
we end
no.
right on time.
Please no.
Yeah, and then Ayumi will wonder why we suddenly are like, "Well, that was a great stream." Didn't
Who's
you
giving-
think so, Ayumi? Who didn't get any chance to say anything.
Oh God.
I will leave chat right now.
If you want, Ayumi, you can be the fishing NPC. And there he goes.
Oh my God.
Well, thank you so much for coming out, everyone.
Yeah,
Had a good time.
I think we've got to we've sundered our friend here, and we need to pick up all the pieces.
Well, we'll have to begin our great worker for joining.
Yep. And we'll rejoin next week, Sunday, same time, same place. Please be here. Bring your friends as always, and thank you for coming.
Probably
Next,
More
Same.
Elpis to discuss.
Yeah, more Elpis, more unsundered world, I imagine.
yeah, I think next
Yeah.
week we will try to leave the first room.
We can do it.
And then we'll
Give
talk
us
about
your
the
encouragement. We can do it.
I believe in us.
Use your dynamis; it'll work. All right, everybody. I guess I'll close out the stream. We'll see you next week. Thank you all for coming
See
to
you next week
Lorelines.
for a proper Elpis episode
Thank
with
you
us
all.
not going off on rants.
No promises.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.